The owner thought he was catching lazy staff, but what he saw his waitress hiding with a broken hand left him speechless. You know, people always say you never really know what happens when the boss isn't watching. Some owners don't want to know. They'd rather stay in the office, check the numbers, and assume everything out front is fine. But not Daniel Whitmore. Daniel owned the Harbor Street Diner, a corner spot in Toledo, Ohio, that had been in his family for 2 generations. His father started it back in the late 70s, and when his health failed, Daniel took over. He modernized some things, added new booths, brought in better coffee, but he also kept the old school spirit. The neon sign still glowed red and blue above the entrance. The jukebox in the corner still swallowed quarters. The regulars, truck drivers, retired factory workers, young couples on budget dates, they still came in every week. Daniel had a reputation in town for being a fair boss, but he also knew that employees acted differently when he was around. Too polite, too careful, too stiff. He wanted to see the real side of his diner, the jokes between staff, the way they handled pressure, whether the service still held up when no one thought he was watching. So, one Thursday morning, instead of putting on his usual dress shirt and stepping into his office, Daniel showed up in plain jeans, an old gray t-shirt, and a borrowed ball cap. He told only the head cook, Pete, about his plan. Everyone else would just think he was a new hire, a busboy named Danny. From the moment he walked in, the atmosphere felt different. He wasn't the boss anymore. He was invisible. "Hey, new guy," one of the younger waiters, Travis Mendoza, called out. "Grab that mop. Someone spilled coffee near booth 6. Daniel nodded, biting back a smile. Nobody rushed to shake his hand or kiss up to him. He was just another pair of hands, and he liked that. But within an hour of running plates and wiping counters, something unusual caught his eye. At table 4, Marissa Cole, a waitress who had been with the diner for nearly 12 years, was struggling. Not with her usual workload. She'd always been sharp, fast on her feet, the kind of server who remembered coffee orders without writing them down. But today, her left hand was wrapped in a brace, stiff and awkward. Balancing plates looked painful. Even lifting a glass of water made her wince, though she tried to cover it with a tight smile. "Need me to take that, Marissa?" Travis asked quietly, stepping beside her. She shook her head quickly. No, I got it." But Daniel could see she didn't. The tray tilted. A plate nearly slid off before she caught it with her good hand. She laughed it off, but her face was pale. At first, Daniel figured she must have had an accident. Maybe she fell at home, maybe a kitchen mishap. But then he noticed something stranger. The customers seemed to notice too. A couple at booth 9 slipped her a tip that was at least triple what the check came to. An older man at the counter, regular named Jimmy, patted her shoulder and said softly, "Hang in there, Marissa." And the other staff? Instead of getting annoyed at her slower pace, they were covering for her. Travis ran drinks for her. Another waitress, Gina Martinez, quietly reset her tables before she could. The cook even held orders a little longer so she wouldn't fall behind. It wasn't pity. It was protection. Everyone seemed to know something Daniel didn't. By lunchtime, curiosity gnawed at him. He watched Marissa carefully, trying not to make it obvious. Her limp hand wasn't just injured, it was swollen, bruised under the brace. But she didn't complain once. She smiled at every customer, cracked small jokes, and carried on as though nothing was wrong. When the rush slowed, Daniel slipped into the back to grab more napkins. He found Marissa there, massaging her wrist with her good hand, whispering curses under her breath. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice casual, playing his role as Danny the busboy. She startled, then forced a smile. "Oh, yeah, just clumsy, that's all. Dropped a box at home." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. Daniel didn't push, not yet, but something told him her story didn't add up. He walked back out to the dining room, his mind buzzing. If she really was that hurt, why was she still working? Why hadn't she taken time off? And why was everyone, from coworkers to customers, acting like they were in on some secret? He thought going undercover would reveal shortcuts or laziness. Instead, it revealed a mystery. But if there's one thing Daniel knew about himself, it's that once he smelled something off, he couldn't just let it go. By the second day, Daniel realized something important. This wasn't just about a waitress with a sore hand. Something deeper was happening, and everyone but him seemed to know the script. That morning, the diner smelled like bacon grease and hot pancakes, the kind of smell that clung to your clothes long after you left. Daniel carried plates to booth 12, wiped down the counter, and pretended to struggle like a new busboy who hadn't learned the rhythm yet. From the corner of his eye, he kept watching Marissa. She carried on as usual, smiling, chatting with customers, scribbling orders, but every time she lifted more than a single plate, her jaw clenched tight. She tried to hide it, but pain was written across her face in flashes. "Hey, new guy," Gina called from the other side of the diner. "Can you top off coffee at booth 5? "On it," Daniel said, moving with the pot, but he lingered near Marissa as he passed. She was refilling creamers with one hand, fumbling with the tiny containers. One slipped and splashed on the floor. Daniel bent quickly to grab it. "You sure you're okay?" he asked quietly. Marissa glanced around like she was afraid someone else might overhear. "Fine," she whispered, then louder, with a bright smile. "Thanks, Danny." That was her routine, pain in private, cheer in public. But what unsettled Daniel even more was how naturally the staff adjusted around her. Travis picked up a heavy tray without being asked. Gina swapped shifts so Marissa wouldn't have to close. Pete the cook slid her smaller orders, easy ones she could manage. It wasn't favoritism. Nobody resented her. If anything, they seemed protective, almost loyal. And the customers, that part gnawed at him. One woman leaned across the counter, speaking softly. "You hanging in there, honey?" Marissa just smiled, her good hand brushing the woman's arm. "Always." Later, a trucker dropped a 20 on a $10 ticket and muttered, "For the kids." For the kids. Daniel tucked that phrase away. He didn't know if the man meant her kids or someone else's, but it was another piece of a puzzle he couldn't solve yet. When the lunch crowd thinned, Daniel bussed dishes beside Travis. He decided to fish for information. "So, what's her story?" he asked casually, tilting his chin toward Marissa. Travis frowned. "Who?" "Marissa. She seems tough." Travis shrugged, stacking plates. "She is. Toughest person in here." "Why's that?" Daniel pressed. The younger man glanced over his shoulder at Marissa, then lowered his voice. "She's just got a lot going on. Don't ask too many questions, Danny. You'll figure it out." And that was all he'd say. That night, Daniel lay in bed, turning it over in his head. He had expected to find out who slacked, who badmouthed him, who cut corners. Instead, he found a waitress working through visible pain, a staff quietly protecting her, and customers who seemed almost invested. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. A broken hand should have meant time off, a doctor's note, maybe even workers' comp paperwork. But here she was, pushing through every shift, as if she couldn't afford to stop. And if everyone else already knew why, then he was the outsider, the only one in the dark. Daniel wasn't used to being in the dark in his own diner, but if Travis was right, that he'd figure it out, then the only way forward was to get closer to Marissa herself. The next morning, Daniel showed up early before the rush. The diner was quiet, sunlight spilling through the big front windows, dust swirling in the beams. Marissa was already there, wiping down tables with her good hand while balancing a tray of condiments in the other. He took a breath and decided this was his chance. "Morning," Daniel said, picking up a stack of menus. She smiled faintly. "Hey, Danny, you're early." "Figured I'd try to get ahead before Pete starts barking orders." He chuckled lightly, then added, "You always come in this early?" "Old habit," she said, setting the tray down. "Gets me a head start before the chaos." He noticed the way she flexed her fingers inside the brace, wincing slightly. "You sure that hand's okay?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Marissa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then she forced it back. "Like I told you, I dropped something heavy at home. Just clumsy, that's all." Daniel hesitated. "I don't know." "Looks worse than clumsy." Her eyes flickered, guarded. "You a doctor now?" "No," he said quickly. "Just concerned." Marissa leaned on the table she'd just cleaned, lowering her voice. "Listen, Danny, you're new here, so let me give you a tip. This place is like family. We all carry our stuff, but we don't put it on the table unless we have to. Understand?" Daniel nodded, even though it only made him more curious. Throughout the day, he tried to keep the conversation light whenever they crossed paths. He asked where she grew up, right there in Toledo, how long she'd been at the diner, 12 years, and whether she ever thought about leaving. "Leave?" she repeated with a laugh. "And do what? I'm good at this. People come in hungry, I give them food, they leave happier than they came. Simple enough." But doesn't it get tiring? Daniel asked. Of course it does, she said, sliding a plate onto the counter. Everything does. Doesn't mean you quit. There was grit in her voice, like someone who had lived through storms Daniel couldn't see yet. Later, during the afternoon lull, Daniel caught her in the back again, carefully wrapping a fresh bandage under her brace. He stepped closer. You sure you shouldn't be resting that hand? Marissa exhaled, clearly annoyed. Danny, I appreciate your concern, but I can't afford to rest. Why not? She shot him a sharp look, then softened. Because people depend on me, that's why. He wanted to ask who, her kids, her parents, a friend, but before he could, Gina popped her head in. Marissa, table 8's asking for you. Marissa slipped the brace back on, straightened her shoulders, and walked out like nothing was wrong. Daniel stayed behind, staring at the counter where she'd left a crumpled prescription slip. He couldn't make out the doctor's name, but he saw enough. Follow-up required. So she had seen a doctor, and yet she was still working double shifts. That night, after closing, Daniel was mopping near the booths when Marissa sat down at the counter, looking exhausted. She rubbed her temples with her good hand. Without thinking too much, he walked over and said, You ever think about asking for help? Marissa chuckled dryly. Help costs money, money I don't have. Daniel tilted his head. But you've got people here who care about you. I see it. For the first time, her eyes softened, and she looked at him, really looked. You notice a lot for a busboy. He smiled faintly. Maybe more than I should. Marissa shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. You're nosy, Danny. Careful with that. Curiosity doesn't always get you answers. It just gets you deeper in someone else's mess. But Daniel couldn't help himself, because by now, he was sure her mess was bigger than a broken hand. Friday nights were always chaos at Harbor Street Diner. The high school football game had just ended, so the place was packed with teenagers in jerseys, parents trying to corral kids, and regulars who came in every week for burgers and pie. Daniel had been bussing tables non-stop for an hour when he saw Marissa weaving through the crowd, balancing a tray stacked with burgers and fries. Her good hand gripped the edge tight, her injured one struggling to steady the weight. He could see the tremor in her wrist from across the room. Marissa, let me grab that, Travis said, rushing over. No, I've got it, she snapped, sharper than usual. Her face was flushed, sweat beading on her forehead, but she didn't have it. Halfway to the table, the tray tilted. A basket of fries slid off, scattering across the tile. A glass of soda toppled, spilling down a customer's lap. Gasps rippled through the diner. Marissa froze, her chest rising and falling fast. For a second, Daniel thought she might burst into tears, but then she forced a shaky smile, grabbed napkins with her good hand, and started apologizing. I'm so sorry, folks. I'll fix this right away. No charge. The family at the booth smiled kindly, but their eyes lingered on her brace. One of the kids whispered to their mom, who reached out and touched Marissa's arm gently. It's all right, honey. Don't hurt yourself. Daniel moved quickly, cleaning up the mess before it spread. As he crouched, he glanced up and caught something he hadn't seen before. Marissa's expression when she thought no one was looking. It wasn't just pain, it was fear. When the crowd thinned a little, he found her in the back, sitting on a stool with her head in her hands. Travis was beside her, speaking in a low voice. You can't keep this up, Marissa. You're gonna hurt yourself worse. I don't have a choice, she whispered back. You do. Take a break. Tell someone. Drop it, Travis. Please. Her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel stayed just out of sight, his stomach twisting. Later that night, when they were closing up, Marissa stayed behind to roll silverware, even though her injured hand moved slowly, each motion stiff. Daniel approached, setting down a stack of menus. You should have let someone else handle that tray earlier, he said gently. Marissa shot him a tired smile. Customers don't come here to see me drop food. Customers also don't want to see you hurt. She shrugged. I'll heal, that's life. Her words were strong, but her eyes gave her away. They were glassy, rimmed with exhaustion. Daniel leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. Marissa, whatever's going on, it's not just about a broken hand, is it? For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at him like she was deciding whether to tell the truth. Then, just as quickly, she looked away. You ask too many questions, Danny. She stood up, grabbed the silverware basket, and walked off before he could say more. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the scene, the tray tipping, the way her coworkers shielded her. the way the customers treated her like she carried more weight than anyone could see. He had gone undercover expecting to catch laziness or gossip. Instead, he saw loyalty, pain, and a secret no one was willing to share. But the tray incident had shown him one thing. Marissa was at her breaking point, and if he didn't find out why soon, something far worse might happen. Saturday night, after the last table cleared and the neon sign flickered off, Daniel lingered in the parking lot, leaning against his car. The autumn air was cool, carrying the faint smell of fryer oil from the diner's vent. He watched as Marissa stepped outside, clutching her purse to her chest, walking slower than usual. She glanced around before heading toward the bus stop down the street. Daniel hesitated. Part of him knew it wasn't his business. He could have gone home, come, slept, and kept pretending to be Danny the busboy. But something about the way she hunched her shoulders, the way she clutched that purse like it was armor, wouldn't let him leave. He followed, keeping a respectful distance. The bus ride was short. She got off near a worn-down apartment complex just west of downtown Toledo. The building had peeling paint, busted mailboxes, and a flickering hallway light that buzzed overhead. She climbed the stairs slowly, her brace tapping against the railing. Daniel stayed outside, unsure what to do. He felt like an intruder, but then he saw it, through the thin curtains of a second-floor window. Marissa set her bag down and two small kids rushed toward her. A boy, maybe 8. A girl, a little younger. They wrapped themselves around her waist, careful of her injured hand. "Mom!" they shouted in unison. Marissa bent down, kissing their heads. "I'm home, babies." Daniel's chest tightened. The pieces clicked into place. The extra tips, the staff covering for her, the "for the kids" comment. Marissa wasn't just working through pain, she was surviving for her children. But then came something that chilled him. As she helped the kids with what looked like homework on the table, the boy reached for her brace. "Does it still hurt, Mom?" "A little," she admitted softly, "but I'll be fine." "How'd it happen again?" he asked innocently. Her eyes flickered toward the door. She hesitated, then whispered, "Don't worry about it. Just, let's finish your math, okay?" Daniel frowned. That pause, that glance at the door, it wasn't the reaction of someone who dropped a box at home. It was the reaction of someone afraid. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, torn between leaving and knocking on the door. But before he could decide, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from down the block. A man rounded the corner, broad-shouldered, rough around the edges, his shirt stained, his movements slow like he'd had a few drinks. Marissa's curtains shifted. She moved quickly, ushering her kids into the bedroom. Seconds later, the man banged on the door. "Marissa, open up!" Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He could hear the man's voice, low but sharp, through the thin apartment walls. Marissa cracked the door open just enough to step outside. "You need to go," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice down. "I just want to talk," the man slurred. "You've had enough talking." Her tone was steady, but her injured hand was trembling at her side. The man leaned closer. "What, you think you can keep me away? You think some little brace is going to stop me?" Daniel's gut twisted. That was it. That was the truth behind her injury. Marissa stood her ground, whispering fiercely, "If you come back here again, I'll call the police. You hear me?" The man scoffed, muttered something Daniel couldn't make out, then staggered back down the stairs, disappearing into the night. Marissa waited until he was gone, then slipped back inside. Through the curtain, Daniel saw her collapse onto the couch, head in her hands. He felt like he couldn't breathe. He had gone undercover to check on his diner, but instead he had walked straight into someone's private war. Driving home that night, his mind raced. She had lied to protect herself, lied to keep her dignity, and yet she still showed up every day, smiling through the pain, waiting tables like nothing was wrong. But now Daniel knew the truth, and it meant he couldn't just stand by any longer. Sunday morning, the diner was quieter than usual. Churchgoers trickled in slowly, families dressed in their best clothes, older couples reading the paper over eggs and toast. Daniel worked his shift like always, refilling coffee, clearing plates, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He couldn't stop replaying the night before. Marissa, standing in that doorway, facing down a man who clearly wasn't just an accident waiting to happen. Her injury suddenly had a face behind it. By late afternoon, Daniel decided he couldn't wait any longer. He found Marissa in the back, sorting silverware with one hand, while her brace sat on the counter beside her. The sight of her raw, swollen wrist made his chest tighten. Marissa, he said softly. She looked up, weary but smiling. Hey, Danny, you need something? He stepped closer. His voice was steady, but there was no pretending now. Yeah, I need the truth. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I saw you last night, Daniel said quietly. I saw where you live. I saw him. Her whole body stiffened. The fork in her hand clattered onto the counter. For a long moment, she just stared at him, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. You followed me? She whispered, her voice sharp but shaking. I didn't mean to pry, Daniel said quickly. I couldn't walk away, not after seeing what you're carrying. Her eyes filled with something between anger and fear. That's not your business, Danny. I know, he admitted. But I also know you don't deserve this, and your kids definitely don't. She froze, her breath catching. You saw them? Daniel nodded. I did, and I get it now. Why you keep showing up. Why you don't quit, even when you're in pain. You're doing it for them. Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head, refusing to let them fall. You don't understand. If I tell anyone, if I make noise, he'll make it worse. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. Marissa, you don't have to fight this alone. She swallowed hard, her good hand trembling on the counter. Why do you even care? You've known me a week. For the first time since he'd gone undercover, Daniel pulled off his cap and straightened his shoulders. His voice shifted, no longer the shy busboy. Because I'm not just Danny. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I own this diner. Silence. Marissa's eyes widened, her face flushing with shock and betrayal. You what? I went undercover to see how my staff worked when I wasn't around, he explained. I thought I'd find laziness, maybe gossip. Instead, I found you. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She took a step back like she'd been slapped. So all this time you've been spying on me? Not on you, Daniel said firmly. On the diner. But yes, I saw more than I expected, and now I can't ignore it. Marissa shook her head, tears finally spilling over. You don't get it. You might own this place, but you don't own my life. I don't need your pity. Daniel's voice softened. This isn't pity. It's respect. I see how strong you are, but even the strongest people break if they never get help. She turned away, wiping her face with the back of her hand. For a long while, she didn't speak. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, If you knew what he's done, you wouldn't look at me with respect. You'd look at me like I'm damaged. Daniel's heart ached, but he stood his ground. Try me. Because now the walls were cracking, and Daniel knew the revelation was coming, whether Marissa was ready or not. The clatter of plates and the steady hum of conversation from the dining room felt miles away. In the back of the diner, Daniel and Marissa stood in tense silence, the weight of his confession hanging heavy in the air. Marissa's hands shook as she reached for her brace, fastening it back onto her wrist like armor. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to meet his. You don't get it, Daniel, she whispered, finally using his real name. You don't know what he's capable of. Daniel leaned against the counter, keeping his tone gentle. Then tell me. Help me understand. Her lips pressed together, her chest rising and falling unevenly. For a moment, Daniel thought she would shut him out again, but then something in her cracked. The exhaustion, the pain, the fear she'd been carrying for too long. She sank into a chair, her good hand covering her face. Her voice was muffled but raw. It wasn't an accident. He did this. He's been doing it for years. Not just to me. Her voice broke. She lowered her hand, meeting Daniel's eyes with a look that made his stomach twist. The kids see it. They hear it. I try to hide it, but they're not stupid. Daniel felt a rush of heat in his chest. Anger, grief, helplessness all at once. Marissa, I stayed because I thought I could control it, she continued, words tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. If I kept him calm, if I kept things quiet, then maybe he wouldn't go too far. But last month, when he grabbed me and twisted my wrist, she held up her brace with a bitter laugh. That's when I realized he already had gone too far. Her voice cracked and tears streamed down her cheeks. She brushed them away roughly, ashamed. But I can't just leave. I can't pick up my kids and disappear. Where would we go? How would I feed them? This job, this diner, it's all that's keeping us afloat. Daniel crouched beside her, his voice low but steady. You shouldn't have to carry that alone. She looked at him, eyes sharp through her tears. You think I haven't heard that before? Everyone says get help. But help doesn't pay rent. Help doesn't keep my kids in school. Help doesn't stop him from showing up at my door at night, no matter how many times I threaten to call the cops. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. Then let me be more than just another voice telling you to get help. Let me do something. Marissa laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Why? Because I'm your employee? Because I make good pie and keep the regulars happy? No, Daniel said firmly, because you're a human being who deserves better than this. And because your kids deserve to grow up in a home where they're not afraid every time the door slams. Her face softened, the fight draining from her eyes. She looked down at her brace, turning it slowly with her good hand. You don't know what it's like, she whispered. Waking up every day wondering if today will be the day he goes too far. Wondering if your kids will hate you for staying or hate you for leaving. Daniel swallowed hard. No, I don't know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to lose people because you stayed silent too long. I lost my father that way. He worked himself into the ground, never asked for help, never let anyone in. By the time we realized how bad it was too late. Marissa blinked at him, surprised. I'm not going to stand by and watch someone else I care about get destroyed because they think they have to carry it alone, he added. Her lip trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, I'm scared. Daniel nodded. You're supposed to be. That means you're aware of the danger, but fear doesn't mean you can't take the first step. For the first time, her defenses lowered completely. She pressed her good hand over her face, sobbing quietly, shoulders shaking. Daniel stayed beside her, not touching, just being there until she calmed. When she finally looked at him again, her eyes were red but clearer. If I do this, if I try to leave him, you promise me you won't let me fall? Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. I promise. And with that, the secret she'd carried for years wasn't hers alone anymore, and Daniel knew the real work was just beginning. The following week felt different inside the Harbor Street diner. The same clinking of silverware, the same hiss from the griddle, the same regulars ordering black coffee and blueberry pie. But for Daniel and Marissa, everything had shifted. After their